they attack black people after they've been murdered, when they did absolutely nothing wrong, you're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people. They lynched people. They raped people. They enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages? Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. So don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them.
Not have a history of killing white people. White people have a history of killing us. See? And what you fear, may I say this, sir? What you fear, and it's a deep guilt thing, that white folks suffer. You are afraid that if we ever come to power, we will do to you and your fathers what you and your people have done to us.
Male turns to the black person sitting beside her and says, if you get power, aren't you going to want to do to us what we have done to you? And males say, if women get power, they'll want to do to us what we have done to them. Now, how many of you people of color want to get even with all white folks? How many of you want to get even with one or two? How many of you females want to get even with all males? How many of you want to get even with 6 or 7 of them? How many of you people of color and females want to get equity with white males? Equal treatment under the law. How many want Well, see, the whole thing is not about getting even. It is about getting equity. And yes, somebody needs to be in control, but the possession of the proper urinary tract does not make you more qualified to be in control than somebody else.
It just wasn't by perchance that it happened that way. I mean,
it didn't happen that way perchance. About 10,000 years ago, males and females were acting equitably and were treating one another as equals, and then males took over the power because they have physical power and physical strength.
Who gave them that power?
Men took that power. Men took that power by their physical strength, and they maintain it by their physical strength. And if they don't, then you explain to me why we were willing to use tanks against American citizens in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago. Tanks against American citizens. Well, that's called the ultimate use and misuse of power.
Europeans come to this continent, literally ethnically cleanse the indigenous population out of existence, kill them on a scale that has hardly been equaled, and refer to them as savages. That's an achievement. Who's the savage? The first time I encountered this was in a little town in Massachusetts called Deerfield. It's a reconstruction of what that little town looked like in colonial America. And in front of each house is a plaque that explains something about this house. And then description. On the 18th of October of 1702, the savages attacked. The first time I saw this, the savages. You come in here, destroy everything these people have, and they are the savages. That's an interesting move.
It is.
You know?
I hadn't thought of that before.
Think about it.
Let me say that again. The whole history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other. Before we figured out there were other people to kill, we just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody. And everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well. Right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the North was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war. Right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Well, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I got to charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system. That would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're gonna replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're gonna blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer, telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric, telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them, right? That's the argument. Keep in mind, there's been a net outflow of Mexican folk from this country, out of this country in the last 10 years. Right now, border crossings and actual in-migration at the lowest level they've been since the 1970s. So anybody who believes that is a damn fool, or somebody who does not understand how to do research on the internet, or someone who doesn't care, right? But he says the reason you don't have a job is those brown folks took them.
They'll try to tell you it was everyone, that every civilization did bad things, that human nature is violent, that we're all the same. No, we're not all the same. Because it was never everyone else. It was never the Yoruba who crossed oceans to enslave millions. It was never the Lakota who planted flags on somebody else's sacred land and called it a new world. It was never the Khmer Empire that wrote entire legal systems around skin tone. It was never the Mongols who erased libraries and called it order. It was never the Mexica who cut down entire rainforests for fashion and profit. It was never the Aboriginal people of Australia who declared other races subhuman by scientific law. It was never the Inca who dug into mountains and called it wealth while poisoning the sky. It was never anyone else who turned healing herbs into billion-dollar pharma. Never everyone else who made gender a property tax code. Never everyone else who exported the nuclear family like scripture. It wasn't everyone else who made whiteness a god, blackness a sentence, and everyone else a servant. That was a specific invention, and specific people built it. It was never everyone else who carved borders into bleeding land and called it peace. Never everyone else who renamed your god, your language, your bones, then sold it back to you in textbooks. It was never everyone else who erased the world, then gaslit it. The Swahili coast didn't invent extractive capitalism. The Hawaiians didn't manufacture generational trauma and call it civilization. The Diné didn't colonize the moon or bottle water just to sell it back. The Tamil kingdoms didn't translate astrology into racial eugenics. The Zapatistas didn't force everyone into debt so they could feel divine. This idea that everyone did it, that colonization was just a phase, is the last defense mechanism of a dying empire, because if they can convince you that everyone is guilty, no one has to answer. But memory is too sharp now. The algorithm is awake. The archive is breathing. It was never everyone else. It was them. And the rest of the world? We're not guilty. We're just remembering. We remember what they erased. They always knew what they were doing. Cope.
Hey, good morning. Here's a moment in white history. Have you ever wondered how we found out the proper amount of vitamins, nutrients, minerals, or calories we needed to consume in a day in order to survive? You can thank Dr. Lionel Bradley Pett, who found out exactly what it took to keep the human body alive by starving native children to death. The experiments were performed by the Department of Indian Affairs of Canada under the direction of two physicians. One, Dr. Percy Moore, the Indian Affairs Branch Superintendent of Medical Services, and Dr. Frederick Tisdale, a famed nutritionist and former president of the Canadian Pediatric Society. The First Nations nutrition experiments, as they were called, were a series of experiments run in Canada by the Department of Pensions and National Health, now known as Health Canada, in the 1940s and 50s. At the lowest estimates, these experiments were conducted on at least 1,300 indigenous people, with at least 1,000 of them being children. In these experiments, parents were not informed, nor was their consent given. In the 1940s, Canadian officials became aware that Native children in these residential schools were malnourished. So the Canadian government sent researchers to figure out why these Indigenous children were malnourished. Meanwhile, this evil bastard wanted to know what the recommended intake for different vitamins and minerals should be. He saw the hunger and malnutrition at residential schools as an opportunity to figure out just what the human body needed to survive. So in 1947, he began conducting experiments on about 1,000 children in 6 residential schools across the country. Instead of giving these innocent children food to treat their malnutrition, he gave them supplements like riboflavin and thiamine to see if it would mitigate these problems. It did not. In another experiment, instead of giving these innocent children food to eat, he gave them pieces of enriched bread, thinking that that would improve their malnutrition. It did not. They became anemic and they died. Even though indigenous children were dying, they still continued these experiments. Most of these innocent children were so malnourished that their teeth would fall out, but they wouldn't take them to a dentist because they wanted to see the effects of malnutrition on gum health. Over 1,000 indigenous children were starved to death in these residential schools, and the experiments kept going. Why? Because they were already marginalized and vulnerable. Nobody was looking out for the best interest of these children. They had no voice and no one to advocate for their best interest. It's because of the starvation and deaths of innocent indigenous children that we now know exactly how many calories, vitamins, nutrients, and minerals the human body needs to stay alive. And that's how the deaths of indigenous children became today's moment in white history.
So guys, there you have it. You have watched the videos and I know you are as pissed as I am to find someone that decides to wake up one day and call black people savages. And I am so happy because people turned out to, in large numbers in fact, to make him go to his place. They took him to his place and I think he must have learned from that because they have shown him with evidence, a lot of evidence why. If they are the last people to be called savages, it has to be the black people. For what reasons? One, for the fact that black people have never had a history of being like attacking each other, black people attacking each other and killing each other, you know, stuff like that. Black people do not have a history of doing things like those. But what do white people have? They have killed themselves in way before we were part of them or something of that sort. The Vikings, for example, they have been doing those things ever since. They have had problems with everyone. They even have problems with themselves. They are unable to live with anyone. They are unable to live even with each other, you know. Black people do not have history of doing such things. Black people have a history of community, loving each other, taking care of each other, and, you know, just being a community and living and enjoying life as it is. But what do we see with the other people? You know, it's very hard for them to try to convince us that they are not the real savages because how do you explain people that fight each other? They are white people, they are the same. And initially they did not even want to accept that. They wanted the division. They are so glued to that division thing. They have done it to themselves in the past. They prefer to just be split. They prefer to divide over things I would call total and utter nonsense. They do not have a history of living well with each other. How do you expect them to live well with other people that are not them? These are the same people that want to lecture us on what being a good human being is. People that have done all these wrong and evil things to our forefathers, to our ancestors. They have done a lot of damage that we are even unable to think with your straight mind right now. It's even hard for you to imagine that someone is actually capable of doing what they did. And they did that in the past. They still do it even now. Under guise of other things, but they still do it. Look at all this hate that is with the black people. They hate black people for doing this and that. They hate black people for taking their jobs. They hate black people for living in their country. They hate black people for everything. They absolutely don't see any good reason to live with others. Yesterday I did a video on them claiming that they invented everything and that African Americans, or if you like, Black Americans, invented nothing. And I did that video, and they were all over in the comment section saying what? Still claiming that African Americans never invented anything, even when you have given them the receipts, even when you're asking them to do a research on what they're saying, because I do not really prefer when someone is speaking from a point of ignorance. You need to have your research right, you need to have facts, you need to have your figures. And then now when we are having a discussion, let's have a discussion that is meaningful and it's informed by logic, not ignorance. They are unable to just accept that they are not all that they have made in their minds to, they have this notion that is in their minds. They think that they are all that, they are everything, they are the alpha and omega, I think if there's the last person to teach us about being a good human being, being a decent human being, it has to be the white man. That has to be the very last person I will listen to when they talk to me about being nice, being a human being, being a basic human being. The things that they have done, and they still stand by that. They still argue, they still have these discussions where they are defending their ancestors. What does that mean? It basically just means that this is what they believe in, and they do not see anything wrong with that. Even though they have seen the outcome, they have seen everything that has happened after that, they still don't think it is wrong. That's why they can still do it, and they're still doing it. We all know the stories that are going round. Those are the last people to teach Black people about love. Such a person teaching me about God is crazy. Because if the God that you serve is the same God that asks you to do what you do to others, that is really the same God that I do not want to worship. That is exactly the God that I do not want an association with. These are the same people that want to come to Africa and teach us about love. What do you know about love? What is the first thing that you know about love? Teach us about hate, and then maybe it will make sense. And I'm not meaning to say that all white people are bad. There are white people that are actually fighting for Black people, and that is very commendable, because it also has to be very hard to come from such a place and deconstruct all those things that you have been told, all those lies. Deconstruction of all that mindset and all, just to come and realize that whatever you were taught in school, whatever you were taught at home is not the truth. And actually come out to speak for those people that are being put down undeservedly. I must really recommend such people. And that is the way that it's supposed to be. In this generation, we're not supposed to be talking about people still hating on others, people still talking ill about others, people still fighting over, basic things that are actually the truth. If African Americans invented something, they did it. Accept it and move on. But it's proving so hard for them. It's proving to be the hardest thing they can do. And at this point, I don't even know if we're ever going to get to a point where we agree. Are we even trying to? Because everything that a Black person does is wrong. Everything that a Black person takes part in has to be wrong, or, our brothers are being killed. How many times do we watch on the news that a Black man has been killed by the cops? Many times. And for what reason? Just color. Most times there's no evidence of whatever they have done. There's nothing to show that they deserve that. And it would be understandable if they were doing that to their own kind. They are not. It's only when it's a Black person that They overreact, they do all those things. They are trying to eliminate us by all means. But I'm thankful to God because He does not operate like them. He has given us the numbers. That is why they keep fighting us, because now we have numbers and we know what they did, and we have gone to school and we have educated ourselves, because even their history doesn't tell us the truth of who we are and how we came to be. We are self-taught. We know what happened to our forefathers. We know everything that they did to them. And now that we are self-aware and we are not willing to let that happen again, they are angry, they are mad. They feel as if we don't belong to this world. The world is their own and they're the only people that need to be here. If they are to tell us anything about uniting, they need to ask themselves why they were never uniting with the other white people, the Irish and so on. Why were they not uniting? They're the same color, they're the same white people, but they had problems even with each other among themselves. Those are not the people that can tell us what to do about unity, what to do about coming together, what to do about loving each other. Those are my 2 cents, guys. I hope that you have enjoyed this video and learned a thing or two. If you're new to this channel, kindly consider subscribing, and for any returning or new subscribers, thank you so much for choosing to be here. I hope to see you on my next video, and kindly remember to share and leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think about this video, and it will be nice interacting with you in the comment section. So guys, I hope to see you on my next one. Bye.